Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Time for a Hand Up podcast. It is Saturday, February 5th, 2022, and I'm really pleased to be joined today by my guest, Jan Besner. In a moment, we'll start a conversation, and I just want to give people a reminder of just a bit of a background on what this is all about. So for me, about 10 years ago, when my first business didn't work out, unfortunately, I was hospitalized for 5 weeks, had a lived experience with mental health challenges. And since that time, I've been trying to think of ways to obviously share stories and engage with all sorts of wonderful organizations and people who are trying to fight stigma. And one of the ways to do that is to start this podcast where I'm inviting people who have had lived experiences. Sometimes they're caregivers, sometimes they have services or ideas to give a hand up to others, or possibly all three. But the goal is to really have some authentic conversations to remind anybody listening right now that you're not alone, that there's no shame, and there should never be, you should never allow anyone to stigmatize you for a mental health challenge. I'll say one last thing and then get into introducing Jan and having a conversation. But I originally called this the Pinned Podcast. And my thinking is that, just an analogy that no matter whether you're the strongest man or woman in the world, you can only take so much. And so if you went to the gym and were doing the bench press with the lightest weight, 45 pounds, you did as many reps as you can until you can't lift it off your chest. Again, even the strongest men and women in the world have a breaking point and can no longer lift it. So it's very much that way with a mental health challenge. Everybody needs a hand up at times. There's only so much we can take. And so hopefully, again, sharing these stories. And again, it's wonderful that Jan is coming on today to talk about some of his life experiences and views. Hopefully we'll provide a hand up and a reminder to anybody listening that they're not alone, and to please reach out and seek some help. So Jan, thanks very much again for joining us. And maybe I'll ask you actually to talk a bit at the outset just about, maybe some of the early days of your experiences with some mental health challenges.
Sure, Jeff. And again, thank you very much for having me. This podcast and the raison d'être, the reason being that you started this, is something that's near and dear to me, as I'd like to characterize myself maybe as a recovering and not recovered, because I don't know if you ever recovered, depressed person. And for as long as I can remember, I have been saddled with the gift of anxiety or the challenges of irrational, sometimes uncontrollable angst over the littlest things. So if you ask me, when is my first memory of being anxious to the point of it not making any sense? I can pull up first day of school, where most people are excited and or indifferent, maybe annoyed. For me, it was just heart palpitations, anxiety, absolute fear, dread, running the Terry Fox run, putting myself out there, I guess, in a place where I would be not necessarily the center of attention, but it would be a day of attention, or a day where there'd be attention. So any firsts, where most people are excited about firsts, or any novelty, trying something new for the first time. I was never the one who was excited to try that thing new. I would be more petrified with fear and angst of the failure, or of, well, what is going to happen? The unknown. So whereas some treat the unknown with again, excitement, for me, it was just absolute trepidation. And when you're young, you don't necessarily understand that feeling, right? You don't label it. Like, I didn't know the word anxiety until my 20s. And so that's partly why, I wanted to kind of talk to you, is just to sort of, I guess, sort of explain to those who, will take the time and listen to what I have to say, just, I guess, that path and that journey, which, continues on today.
And when you say this started at an early age, what about those times? Because I think, you and I are both fathers, and our kids are growing up in times of disruption and a lot of angst, et cetera. But in those days, what did you find? I mean, mental health challenges where they weren't talked about as much, right? Or in terms of, did you?
No,
Yeah.
they weren't at all. So I'm an only child. Was brought up by a very strong, passionate, loving, beautiful mother, who wears her heart on her sleeves, and sometimes would benefit from a filter. But you take the good with what that comes with, right? And a very strong, silent, stoic father, also very loving, but two personality traits that were incredibly different, and definitely at times probably weren't the yin to the each other's yang. So right then and there, only child, you become, early on, I remember being quite pensive, and introspective. I am still an introvert. So, once we're done with this chat, I'm definitely going to be exhausted, as opposed to motivated, as I am when I'm with a lot of people. But, my father, similar to you, when I was, under the age of 10 years old, had been a senior executive at a large financial institution for a very long time. That institution got purchased, duplication of efforts. He was shown the door at the age of 50 and had to rebuild and restart his life. And now with the benefit of hindsight, I see and I know what he went through. Massive loss of weight, medication, the whole thing. Nothing to be necessarily ashamed about, but at the time, wasn't spoken about at all, and was very much closed off. Not well, and I can understand protecting your 8, 9, 10-year-old son from those types of discussions or conversations. Which is, we can get to that later, which is not how I speak to my daughters today about those things. Quite the contrary, but we definitely not spoken about then. And that creates a dynamic of stress in the house, of tension, because there's an elephant in every room. Forget about the room, there's one in every room. So, that I think would be kind of the first real taste of someone else that I saw going through certain challenges. And 100%, I go back into my memories, and, that would give me anxiety and make me feel uncomfortable. And naturally so, because you see someone hurting and you don't know why, and we're not talking about it, and you're questioning constantly, right?
And can I ask you, do you think that was partly because of the way stigma was viewed in the day? So it was going to be that they were going to try to protect you as their child, and they were concerned about the stigmatization of the outside world, or is that not necessarily part of it?
I think so. I also think there was an innocent ignorance back then. I can remember in 1992, the reason I know the date is because it was around my bar mitzvah, and my father was in the middle of his struggles, and he was definitely down 20, 30 pounds, and everyone would be going up to him, oh, you look great. You look wonderful. Look how fit you look. Whereas today, someone who drops weight that dramatically, they're not giving you that type of compliment, or they're not glossing over it. Yes. It would be more of, is everything okay? Which is the right way to do it, which is the right way to speak about it. So no, it was, I think it's a mixture of, in the late 80s, early 90s, innocent ignorance, also false pride, definite, nobody wants to show weakness. So as much as I think maybe the outside world wasn't extending their hand in assistance, I think as much as my father, with pride and wanting to maintain a certain air, wouldn't have been open to it. it's a generational thing,
Right.
it's so I think that weakness is, comes from self, or came from self back then. That perception of weakness, it came from self back then. Whereas now it's going on something like this, I don't think one would think that, I'm weak to
Sure.
discuss anything.
I have to say it's interesting because the weight analogy that I've tried to emphasize here is a great equalizer, because it's not about weakness. Again, the strongest man or woman in the world will not be able to lift 40, even 45 pounds like forever. After a few hundred reps or whatever, they're going to stop. And there is a guy who's been a world powerlifting champion who I've spoken to about coming on here in the veterans, right? And he said, of course, that's true. And it is. So, that's just trying to demonstrate, like, anybody who wants to stigmatize someone else for being weak hasn't dealt with the specific situation that other person is dealing with, which is incredibly difficult, and there were other things that would take them down. They're fortunate they're not in that situation. But I think that's a very interesting point. I wanted to ask, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead a bit much, but you are, you've done extremely well in terms of being a very successful, respected lawyer, but that is a stressful career, right? And so, I was listening to another podcast where you were open about some of your challenges, and so, how leading into that, I don't know if you'd like to comment on the types of challenges or some of them that you may have had and how you've dealt with them, and how you've also, I believe, been telling your story to be an advocate in support of others, because in the professions, in law and others, obviously there's high expectations, again, historically maybe a lack of a concern to show this weakness again to your peers. But if I can ask you a bit about that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because or ironic, not funny. It's ironic that I went into a profession, it'll be 19 years in November of this year, since I was called. And then I've been working in private practice, which, if we were to stereotype, is high performing, high stress, ambitious, type A, very pressure cooker environment, right? Demands for hours, demands for performance, client demands, always at the highest of levels. Now, if we rewind before I, raised my right hand and got called to the bar, the one thing that was instilled in me by my parents was just limitless ambition and drive to succeed. I was lucky enough to go to the best schools. I worked my tail off to do well because I had in myself an ambition to succeed. There was no safety net for me to fall back on if I wasn't going to succeed in anything in life, right? And I knew that at an early age. But even if there were, that wasn't how my parents raised me. So that comes from me. That comes from being surrounded by ambitious individuals who I saw go out and work their tails off 6-7 days a week, being both my mother and my father. So went through school, always did quite well in school, and was able to manage, what I call swimming in the sewer, right? That anxiety level. It never rose to the point of swallowing me. And so when it never goes overboard, you just think you're stressed. And when you succeed, notwithstanding those levels of stress, you think you've got things under control. So it wasn't until really when I, had finished law school and was writing the bar that was when the level of anxiety that I felt, because of the absolute, hole that I would be in had I not passed and had I not gone to the level, and then you lose your job. And then if you lose that, your stage, then you lose the ability to become an associate. Then you lose, everything, starts to
super high stress at that time.
Correct. But, most people don't think that way. Most people don't, I was snowballing 10 years down the road if I didn't, succeed on what was happening tomorrow, and that's what was going through my head. The environment doesn't help either, because, your first day of bar school, they tell you it's not a right, it's a privilege to become a lawyer, which is absolute horse hockey, because, there's tens of thousands of people who pass those exams every day. And, it's not rocket science. I'm not trying to sell to the world that I'm doing anything that nobody else can do, quite the opposite. But when you're 21, 22 years old, and you're going through that, sense of perspective isn't that of someone my age, right? And I always put a lot of pressure on myself, more than anyone else could. So during that year, when I was realizing I wasn't able to manage myself as best as I could, things would slip, right? Like it was to the point where you stare at a page and it's all gobbledygook. I couldn't read.
Right.
It was paralyzing. And when you can't focus and you can't paralyze, when I get anxious and stressed, like forget. So you walk away and you come back, but this could go on for multiple hours in a day. And the next thing you know, you have your entire day written off. A mental health day that in 2001, 2002, that didn't exist, right? Nobody knew about that sort of stuff. I was fortunate enough to be in a relationship with somebody at the time who I guess was maybe ahead of the times in being introspective with her mental health and her well-being. Again, those weren't the words being used at the time, but between 20 angst, right? Some people call it like the quarter life crisis, and between going through what was a pivotal time, I felt professionally for me, really, you're at the tail end, and then once you're there, you're done, and you start working, and I think that just got the better of me. I was introduced to therapy, which was perfect to be able to get out what was stuck inside. And that helped. Whatever the stresses were for what I was going through at the time, whatever my stresses were, or, carry over from growing up, issues with my parents, nothing that nobody doesn't go through necessarily, but just having an outlet or a source or a therapy, and in this case it was going to see a therapist, definitely helped. So that was that to me was something that was, when it was first introduced to me, it was hard to swallow, because I had seen heard my father going through that 10 years prior. I had heard, negative things about all of that, how it's all garbage, it doesn't help, etc. So you've got trepidation and false idea that it's going to be anything helpful. But I didn't tell my parents, I didn't tell anybody about it. My girlfriend was the only one who knew. And, did that for the better part of 2 years, got through bar school, and while I was doing my first year of working. The problem that happens is that you realize that, okay, that helps, but the more you get in touch with yourself and embrace things, whereas maybe before I was ignoring or trying to push it away, the more you open yourself up to healing, I found the more I probably was opening up myself up to pain and feeling that pain, which again is part of the healing process, because you need to know really how bad the wound is for it to start getting better. And so, at that point, it was very clear with both my doctor and my therapist that, just talking for an hour once a week wasn't going to be enough. And pharmacology was going to take in and help regulate, whatever's going on inside here. And, that was, I would say, a savior in so many ways. Because then you're still working every day, but you don't have to work as hard.
Right. Or do you, at the time, do you think the law firm, and not even necessarily yours, but the legal profession would have been open to that? Or again, there were concerns that this is something I better it, and these are private matters too. I mean, obviously everybody's, entitled to take care of themselves without opening it up to the world if they choose not to. But do you think that, did you have concerns about being stigmatized at the time?
I worked at a place that was, loving, embracing from the get-go. And so I can't say that the firm and the people who I was working with would have turned a blind eye to it. It was more of a generalization of, first of all, myself to speak that truth back then in 2003 and 2004. I would have felt weak. I would have felt like I'm a failure.
Right.
I can remember in the early years, where it was the unknown of the practice as a young associate. When is the phone going to ring? What email is coming up? Am I at 6:30? Is something going to happen? And feeling that uncontrollable anxiety of your life being over for the weekend, which really you shouldn't.
Yeah, sure.
but
Right.
but it was this irrational response to what was coming next. That's not something that you see others going through. So you don't necessarily talk about it.
Right.
You don't hear of other people talking about certain things. And so, why would I be the trailblazer to start saying, hey, are you feeling this sort of thing? Do you get this sort of stress the same way? Are you as tired as I am after, X amount of days in certain environments in a room, in a diligence room, working on a deal? When there's a conference call with the other side that, and it's gonna, do you feel what I feel? Like, it wasn't talked about, right? The legal profession has really been a lot more open-minded to all of well-being. And I say that, I know I'm generalizing, but I say that as a consumer of legal conferences and articles and people writing about all this stuff and what you see on social media and et cetera, really since, 2018, 2019.
Was there some tipping point when you're saying 2018 or 19? Was there anything that happened right around that time, or was it a reflection of society as well? And also, well, COVID, I guess, started in 2020, which has opened up a whole host of other things, I think. But 2018 or 19, was there any tipping point in particular, or?
It's hard to say. For me, I had come across online an American Bar Association treatise or white paper that was written on lawyer well-being. And it basically outlined how the legal profession is one of the leaders for drug and alcohol abuse and mental illness because of all of the stressors that the profession puts on one. The hours, the giving up of personal life, and don't get me wrong, I've been doing it. I love what I do. I think I like my life. I love the imbalance in the balance. Don't get me wrong. But I think there's some who run at this a lot harder. And so there was an article that was written by someone in the United States from Texas, whose name escapes me. But it was on lawyer well-being. And at the time, I was on a committee for a law conference. I'm a real estate attorney, so I do real estate transactional work with a big focus on retail and commercial leasing. It's not a plug. I'm just trying to tie this in.
Of course. No, of course.
And so I was on a committee to help plan a national law conference. And on that committee, I get to pick what session I was going to lead. And so, when I read this article, and then we had our first planning meeting. And at my first planning meeting, they said, okay, well, yeah, what do you want to do for, for your session? And instead of talking about, rent and obligations and all that stuff, I said, you know what? I want to do this. I want to call the author to this article, see if she'll come. I have a friend who is a psychologist who speaks to law firms on mindfulness and on well-being and on how dealing with stress. and I want to do a panel on lawyer well-being and on mental health. And, just bringing that up was, I think as an idea was, I was doing fine. I wasn't anxious about it, but I was definitely curious as to how it would be received. And universally, they were like, no, perfect, yes, done, make it happen.
Great.
And every year since then, I now chair this conference. We've had at least one session on mental health. After that meeting, you look around and then you see that there were other legal conferences or continuing legal education held by law firms on mental health, mental wellness for lawyers, etc. Now, is it something, COVID messes with your memory a little bit, right? So it's hard for me to go COVID to think like, how much this was being talked about, but it was definitely, Bell Let's Talk, I'm sure had started by then. I think there was more awareness of it. I don't think it was as, widespread as it is now,
right?
But it was definitely on the cusp and it was starting. So to answer your question though, lawyers are, we're not speedboats when it comes to change in a lot of things, right? We're like ocean liners. It takes a little bit longer for the boat to start turning. So I'm not surprised in a conservative industry or profession that is mine, that to be vocal about it and to be, I guess at the forefront may have taken longer than in other workplaces, just because of the nature of the white shoe profession of going to court, right? But it's never too late.
Yeah.
And, I think, I know I'm not the only, but I know that there are tons of other folks like myself who in their own little corner went through whatever they went through and spoke up and were proactive quietly or, with small steps like I did. And slowly but surely it spreads.
Fantastic. No, and I think you said something earlier that stuck with me, and I think it's been a common thread through the first few podcasts that I've done, and it was just talking about the self-talk and our own perceptions of being weak. And I had that too. Like for a very long time, I was like plow through it. I was driven. I was gonna make this happen. And at a certain point, like when you're at work and you're not able to concentrate, I wasn't sleeping much anymore. So I was supposed to be have a couple of speaking engagements that I canceled. The quality of my work was going down. I wasn't sleeping, and the self-talk is terrible. So it comes back to the point that all of the people I've spoken to so far who have had lived experiences have said, it's like there is no shame. There is no seek the hand up. Don't stigmatize yourself. Physical and mental health are core intrinsic parts of being alive for everyone. And so we have to have people who feel that they're not cornered and have no way out, that they can reach out, whether it begins with a friend or a family member or a hotline or anybody anywhere. Just, they have to feel that, because I think that's a common thing for people who have had different lived experiences, and would have helped me also, I think, to do this earlier.
To your point though, and using the same metaphor about lifting weight, everyone can be fit. They don't need to lift 2 plates on the bench to be fit. And so I think that's and what I'm trying to say there is that it's okay. And we need to talk about that more.
Yes. Right.
And not give up because you can't lift all that weight without any help.
Exactly.
Right? I say this to anyone who will listen, really, to be honest, is that whether you have a cold, or if you have a headache, or you break a bone, you sprain you sprain your leg, you pull a muscle, there are different remedies to go heal those physical ailments. There is absolutely no reason, and there should be no shame for the mental ones.
Yes.
Because your brain is they say it's a muscle. Well, then you got to take care of it. And it needs help. Sometimes it needs different types of help. Sometimes it needs a pill. Sometimes it needs massaging, through talking. Sometimes it needs a day off and a day of
Yes.
rest, just like when you're in the gym, right? And you need to just shut her down. So
Yeah.
It's to be a complete person, you need to have both the physical and the mental. And,
Yes.
and so that's why I love that we are living in an environment or in a society now where, so many perceived strong people are coming out and writing books or speaking about, their challenges, how they didn't understand them at first, and how they do now. And I see it when my kids are expressing things that they're not quite sure that they understand. I have a keen eye to know what they're feeling, and we talk about it.
Yeah.
And I address it head on, and I can speak to my 10-year-old about, what I've gone through, and she knows that I've been there if she's
Right.
feeling anything remotely similar to, to anxiety or to anything that, that sets her off or that makes her sad. And we hit that head on. And, I love my parents to death, and my father, rest in peace, but they didn't have those tools back then. They didn't come up with that environment, right?
So no, I think you were mentioning that before about being the difference of the generations, and I think it's wonderful that you're doing that with your kids. And for me, I wrote an article in a thing called Concussion Legacy Foundation, and I shared it with all my kids. In fact, I went over it with my kids before and my wife, and I've tried to do what you've done too, because I think, if you want to fight stigma, or if you want to, just allow your own family to understand that, there's no shame, like, that these are issues to be talked about and openly. So I agree with you 100%. And I think, it's fantastic what you're doing. And I think, again, it's something that hopefully, people can realize that there's a knock-on effect. It's not just about themselves. If they can do that with their families, I think hopefully it's helpful for everyone in the long term, because we're all human like that. I want to ask you a couple more questions. I know you've also gone through some serious physical health challenges, and
Yeah.
don't want to dwell on that at all. But I'm happy for you, from what I understand, that you're doing much better, and that's wonderful. But these things also create stress and challenges, and they can impact your mental well-being too. So wondered if there's any story you'd like to share about that as well.
Well, the funny thing about how folks feel anxiety, at least for me anyways, it was a generalized physical feeling with a pressure on my chest, not a you can't breathe, but a real like you feel like you got an anvil, one of those acne anvils that is constantly on your chest. And I was lucky enough to find out through embarrassing manner at a friend's birthday party in 2017 that I had atrial fibrillation in the heart. And it was, after a day where I was incredibly dehydrated, first world issues. I played golf in the sun for 5 hours. I hadn't really eaten, I hadn't really drinking a lot of water. I'd had maybe 2 glasses of wine. It's like 7 o'clock in the evening, 2 glasses of wine, a little bit of cannabis. I was smoking a cigarette, and just vasovagal, spinning, passed out at a party in front of friends and family. I've never done that in my entire life. I don't have issues with substances or anything, like to the contrary. To the point that it was funny. I think my wife, who is across the room, someone said, "Oh, somebody passed out at the party." She's like, "Oh, okay, well, it's too bad for him." Never would have thought it was her husband. So I come to, ambulance comes, because of course it does. At this point, you're sweating, you're totally alert. They run an EKG on me, the ambulance folks. And they asked me, "Did you take your heart medication today?" And I said, "What heart medication?" They're like, "Well, you've got atrial fibrillation." I'm like, "What is that?" Like, "We're taking you to the hospital now because we need to get you evaluated for your heart." Otherwise, my vitals were fine. Once you pass out and you wake up, I was, quote unquote, sobered up. There was no issue there, right? And so they did the whole 9 yards that night. Echo of X-ray of the heart, all these different things. And then the next day, I had a friend who's a cardiologist, and we started figuring things out as to what's going on and what do I need to do. I thought I was asymptomatic, and that's how, because they were asking me, do you feel heart palpitations? Do you feel what have you? I go, no, I don't know what you're talking about. They're trying to describe to me all the different symptoms of what AFib was. And they said, okay, well, after running the battery of tests, MRIs, ultrasound of the heart, X-rays, everything. One cardiologist who had told me, look, you're asymptomatic. We're going to put you on a blood thinner just to prevent the clogging and or prevent potential clogging of your heart valves, which could lead to stroke and all the bad things that come from strokes. Because your heart itself is perfectly healthy. You've got no scarring, no inflammation, no high blood pressure, no artery clogging. Physiologically, you're super healthy. Everything's great. This, for some reason, the wild card, his words, not mine, is the electricity and rhythm in your heart is off. And we have no idea why. Maybe it's genetic. We're going to put you in a study to try and figure it out. Probably won't get the results in your lifetime, but you know what? You'll help contribute. I'm like, no problem. So happy to know that otherwise physiologically everything else was fine, and that my youth had not caught up to me and I'd done any damage to my body. But at this point, I'm 38 years old, 37 years old, not really looking forward to a future of having a blood thinner in my system for the next 40 years of my life.
Right.
By off chance, another, mutual friend of ours who I run into is a cardiologist at another hospital who happens to have like an electrocardiology department where all they look at every day is what I do, is what I have.
Perfect.
And so I go, at this point, I'm resigning myself to like a second, third opinion, what have you. It's going to be fine. So I know I'm droning. I apologize.
No.
Anyway, I finally go see this super specialist on AFib, and battery of tests, the Holters, the heart monitors, the MRIs, the whole thing. We go through the whole 9 yards again, the car wash of heart analysis. Asked me a whole bunch of questions, and then he says, it's not that you're asymptomatic yet. You are always symptomatic. 24/7, you are in pain. Your body never lets out of AFib. You don't know what it feels like to not feel the pressure of atrial fibrillation. Whereas most people, their heart falls out of rhythm for a couple of hours. It happens. They will feel the pressure in their chest, and then they go back, it goes back into rhythm, and then they feel better. Or they'll have some sort of symptom where they can know the difference between being in rhythm or being out of rhythm. Apparently, for decades, I was always out of rhythm and was always in pain. And that was my baseline. That was my normal. I've been lucky that in the last 2 years, I've been able to have successful heart ablations. First one lasted 18 months. The second one, I've celebrated my anniversary on January 11th. So I had it done in COVID because my heart fell out of rhythm after it lasted for 18 months. But let me tell you, when I woke up after those ablations, I literally felt like that anvil that weighed 1,000 pounds had been lifted off my chest. And not only that, I realized that what I thought was anxiety at certain periods of time, or stressors at a certain period of time, whether I'd wake up early for a flight, it wasn't stress, it wasn't anxiety, it was my heart working in overdrive.
Oh, amazing.
So there is a link. Whereas I thought either I was stressed or anxious. No, it was, in that case, the pressure on the chest was not caused by anything that was stressing me. It was literally because my body was working twice as hard for the same output as someone else. So, it may have been an embarrassing, situation on June 3rd, 2017. But, 4.5 years later, I'm fitter than my 21-year-old self. You know, I like my not only my mental health, but my physical fitness is I think top notch. My relationship, obviously, with wine has become a lot more distant, because for 4.5 years, I didn't have a glass of any alcohol because of the meds that I was on. And so I think it's helped me keep this youthful look.
Yeah.
But it changed my entire manner of being, right? It was a great reset. And when I look at myself, there were pictures taken by a photograph that night. And it was one of our friends' 40th birthday, so they had a photographer. And when I look at my face in that picture, I think I look 10 years older then than I do now. My face is more swollen. I'm maybe a little bit puffier. And so, it was a godsend to find out of something that clearly, obviously, could have taken my life.
Yes. Right.
Had it become not treated. But more importantly, did I not only cure that ailment, wherein, at least for now, and we don't know, like my heart could fall out of them many times. So I still have to keep, my way of being on the strict and narrow, not too much caffeine, even though I've been drinking coffee this entire podcast, and it's, a little close to 7 o'clock, but we don't need to mention that. I still need to, but the way of being healthy, my reset of, how I address the day now is not what it was prior to that event. So that, I think, was a fork in the road of my life in terms of, wellness and health, that I'm happy happened, because I know for a fact I'm a healthier person in every way because of it.
It's another, super strong example of why people need to take that hand up, I think, and get some help, because you never know what it is that some of the root causes that you have to deal with, or if there's a physical ailment, like you said too, that's actually partially the cause for, anxiety or other issues. So we can take 1 or 2 more minutes if you like as well. I actually want to ask you about something fun, which was, I'm aware that you're interested in farming and, involved in some organizations. And I want to ask you a bit more about that and how that might tie into, some of your experiences as well.
Thank you. Any chance I get to talk about Farm Aid, I do. So Farm Aid is a nonprofit, a US-based charity that was started in 1985 by Willie Nelson, Neil Young, and John Mellencamp. Later on, Dave Matthews, who is a musician that I'm extremely fond of, and anyone who knows me would say extremely fond of is an absolute understatement, but we don't need to get all fanboy right now. And their mission is to help family farmers, and to provide much needed advocacy, funds, and resources to the family farmer. And the family farmer, in comparison to or in contrast with corporate agriculture, the family farmer is the one who provides, the best food on your table. When everyone says farm to table, like that's what we're talking about. We're talking about those who for generations have been slaving and working the land and providing, sustainable, not just organic, but the healthiest of the healthy food, whether we're talking about vegetables, whether we're talking about beef, pork, poultry, etc. Their methods are much better, not only for the land and for the animals or for the plants that they're growing, but also for us when we eat. And this came out of a farming crisis, farm credit crisis in the United States in the mid 80s. It was basically a fundraiser that was a concert put on by Willie Nelson and his friends. It was actually his name escapes me. I'm drawing a complete blank. Anyways, it'll come back.
Well, we can write about it after and put it with this clip. So.
So it was Bob Dylan. Sorry, it was Bob Dylan's idea.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, because it's so easy to forget Bob Dylan. I had the picture of him walking on the street with the girl in New York in my head. Like that's what I was trying to bring at. Anyways, it was his idea. Willie ran with it, and it was supposed to last for 1 year. And here we are, 30 plus years later, throwing an annual festival to raise money for the exact same cause. It also provides disaster relief funds when needed. Climate change is a real thing, and farmers have been hit hard. With the various climate events that have happened. So how does this tie into me? Urban boy, city boy, whose parents, worked in offices or in retail and never in the land. My father does have, in our family, the Besner family, there is some very remote connections to farming and agriculture, but I'd be lying to you if I'd say that that's what drew me to the cause. I'm an incredible lover of live music. To me, that is my temple. Some believe in a higher power. I believe in the poetry of music. And that to me is what, keeps me happiest and healthy. No one has ever seen my smile grin ear to ear than when I'm at a live concert listening to music that I am passionate about. So that is my happy place. In 2013, I went to my first Farm Aid concert as a donor, and as a guest, really. I bought a ticket, but I bought a nice package so that I could be upfront and personal to see 12 hours of great music of various artists who are all donating their time and paying out of their own pocket to perform to raise money for family farmers. And it was in Saratoga Springs, New York. At the SPAC, Saratoga Performing Arts Center, which I go to every summer to see, Dave Matthews, among others, perform. But this time it was very different. Like the concessions were what we call homegrown concessions. It was really nice. Farmers show up and they are serving their food, awesome. And that's what you're eating.
Awesome.
So the vibe was incredibly communal. I want to say spiritual. There was so much love that was palpable and you could taste it. And I showed up incredibly naive. I'm like, I'm going to go see Dave Matthews and Tim Reynolds play. I'm seeing Neil Young. I'll see John Mellencamp. I'm going to see Willie Nelson and family. But I was blown away by the entire feeling and atmosphere that was created on this day. And I've been to hundreds of concerts and live events. This was different. I'm notwithstanding I'm an introvert, it was something I felt I wanted to become a part of one way or another. And, the world is small, Jeff. I happened to run into, one of my clients who is based in New York, who is actually working the event. And he's a senior executive was a senior executive at the time at a retail company. I said, what are you doing working this event? And he's like, no. I'm with the organization. I'm volunteering my time. So we went out for dinner after the concert. We met up and I said, I don't care if I'm cleaning toilets next year at Farm Aid. Can you please introduce me to the folks at the organization? I need to get involved. I went for the music. I came back for the cause. Because I learned what I saw firsthand, the folks we were helping. I saw firsthand, the atmosphere that was created on that day. And, yes, it was selfish in terms of the amount of joy that I felt, but to be able to give back to something that brings you so much, it's just circular.
Yeah.
And so since then, I've served on their development advisory board. Now I'm just a champion of the cause. And, I try to do more than raise money, but raise awareness. And so thank you for allowing me to,
that's
put this
awesome.
on the platform.
Right. No, thanks for sharing that. I think we've covered a ton of ground, and, the goal of this podcast, as I said at the outset, is really to give people a hand up, especially those that are struggling right now and maybe are hesitant to reach out, hesitant to talk to a friend or a family member or get any help. but through stories like yours and other people who've come on, and my own experiences, I think all of us universally are saying, there's no stigma, no shame, just reach out and get that hand up. And I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to say at the end, but I really appreciate everything you've shared with people. So, but if there's anything else you wanted to say, feel free as well.
No, thank you very much, Jeff, for having me. I really do appreciate it. And the reason I do this is so that if folks do want to, reach out and have a chat, I'm pretty easily available and can be found pretty quickly on the internet. And so it's the least I can do. I don't want others to have to necessarily suffer in ways we have. And
Right.
so if I can try and alleviate that, I will.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Jan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff. Have a great night.
You too.